I made $9 million in my 20s, but today at 29, I'm broke. Now, one of my biggest mistakes was when I took out my last 90,000, got 200,000 in credit and dumped it all into a Hail Mary. My coaching business was dying, and I put all that money to host one more live event to try and bring it back to life. But after dropping that 290K, the event made back 70, and that marked the death of my business. And I know it sounds like I made a stupid gamble, right? But I had every reason to believe that it was gonna work, because 3 months prior, that same event made me $495,000, and I was out in Italy celebrating the best birthday of my life. So today, I wanna take you through every single mistake that I made between these two moments that took me from printing literally $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a month to being over my head in debt in the span of a few months. Now, there's a lot of mistakes here, but I've broken them down into 3 mental errors. And each mental error ultimately stems from one fatal flaw. And the crazy thing is that Alex Hormozi himself saw this fatal flaw when I was sitting next to him at dinner. He told me directly to my face, but I didn't believe him. It didn't save me because I had a broken belief system. So if you're building something right now, please take something from my roadmap of failure. So all of this started in a Walmart. Okay, I was looking to buy this shaver, electric shaver. It was like 50 bucks. And I remember I had to pull out my phone to check my bank account to make sure I could afford the shaver and food for the rest of the week. Now, this shaver, it was very important. It was a very important investment because I had decided that I was gonna shave my head. And this was gonna be the final step in my process of becoming a monk. You see, what happened was I had spent the previous year partying, chasing highs, and blowing the very first $3 million that I ever made. And so I had like 200 bucks and change. I went to the self-checkout, I purchased the shaver, and I purchased a new identity. The identity of the monk. There's a monk that was supposed to be detached from emotions, right? Detached from materialistic things and detached from the simple pleasures of life. And this right here was the biggest mistake that I think is actually the reason that this whole thing crumbled. I just didn't know it yet at the time. And honestly, it would have been very hard to know in the moment because as that monk self that I created, I restarted my Amazon business. Once that business started making money, I restarted my Amazon course, which honestly, that was always the plan. I restarted Amazon so I could restart selling the program. And I went on a generational run with this program. I doubled up almost every quarter. Started here at 30K, then we did 92, then it was 197, 251, all the way to our huge month at $571,000. And now we can start looking at this map because this is where the cracks started to appear. Now, by the way, if you want to follow along, I left this map in the description for you. There's no opt-in. I don't want your email address. I have nothing to offer you, okay? I'm never going to sell a course or a program again. This is just really just me documenting and really for the love of the game. So you can go ahead and grab that if you want. So when I hit that huge month, this is what I started to do. I remember I was in Mexico at the time and I was like, okay, now we can make this thing legit. And here's what I did. I actually started by getting a physical office. And just to highlight how stupid I was in Mexico and I signed a lease for this office sight unseen because I wanted to have the office ready when I got back. Now this office was $3,000 a month, but I did this thing where I would justify the price of things by my course sales because my course was $7,000. And so I would say, okay, the office is 3K, that's only half a course sale every single month. Then I started hiring. I put out an ad for an executive, a CMO, which is crazy because marketing is my strength, but I hired a marketing executive, right? I started adding layers of management and complexity without proving that the business needed them, right? I started hiring employees that were friends and family of other employees and just finding spots for them. All of these mistakes are, whatever at face value, but the real value, the interesting thing is when I started looking at what the pattern was. Because the scary thing is that sometimes someone can literally tell you what's about to happen. And if you don't understand what I'm about to show you right now, then you might end up ignoring their good advice because you don't recognize the pattern, right? And that's exactly what happened to me. So I was in Vegas, really quick story. I was in Vegas, I was in this restaurant, but instead of a plate, I had this giant blue book on my table. And then I look on the side to the right and Alex Hormozi walks in. He sits right next to me and Alex Hormozi, I see him as this business wizard, right? The guy who, if I was gonna ask anybody a thing about my business, I would want it to be him. And so I start telling him about my business and I'm just like explaining how we're expanding, we're doing all these things, getting the office, getting the executives, looking into, developing software and things like that. And Alex is a very intense guy, right? So I'm looking at him and I'm not sure if the things I'm saying are like interesting him or if they're pissing him off. He just has a very serious kind of face. And between these bites of steak, he looks at me, he's like, dude, you're an info business. Your ceiling, if you do everything right, great, and you're an outstanding, stellar entrepreneur, is about $30 million a year. right? Like just focus on the main thing. Don't do all this other stuff because all these other things are distractions. And it sounds like solid advice, but I remember looking at him and being like disappointed. I'm like, oh man, he doesn't get it. He doesn't understand, right? He doesn't really know the vision that I didn't explain my vision properly to him. Now this is the guy that in my head, I considered him to be a wizard, right? He looked at my business. He told me the reality of it. And then when I got home, when I got back from dinner, I ignored almost every single thing that he said. I started spending more money developing our own software. I created physical products to attach to the course. I started hiring more expensive leaders, all because of my first mental error, which is denial. Now, mental errors are states of mind that I was in, right? States of mind, how I was operating. But when I reflect on what a mental error is and why I was there, I think they're all driven by an emotion, right? And so I think the emotion that was driving denial was shame. Now, when people would ask me over these last decade what I did for, what my business was, I would always say something about Amazon. I would never talk about the coaching side. I would say, oh, I have a skincare brand that I sell on Amazon, or I have a home goods brand that I sell on Amazon. I would never ever say that I was a coach, even though that's where I made 90% of my income. And the reason I did this was because I was ashamed that I felt that a guru business wasn't a real business. And so the shame of not wanting to be a guru business drove me into a state of denial, right? Where I just couldn't see the truth. And because I denied the type of business that I was in, I thought that buying parts of the real business would make it into a real business. This is the first pattern, right, that I recognized. Right? We often make mistakes repeatedly in different ways. So it goes mental error or state of mind. Then you have the emotion that drove that state of mind. And then you have the pattern that occurs in my action from living in that state of mind, right? So what I was doing, I was hiring executives, right? Because I thought that having a big org chart, having C-suite titles like CMO, CEO, CTO, I thought that that would make it a real business, right? I thought that if I dressed it up like a real business, it would become one, right? I had an info business that identified as a real business, and obviously that's not how things work. And the next pattern here is that since I denied the actual business that I was in, right? It prevented me from seeing or being concerned with the real economics of the business. Now, at the end of the day, an info business is a very high profit business with no enterprise value. It's like a really high paying job. And so what smart info founders do is they take that profit and they keep it for themselves because they realize that it's just a cash cow. But I didn't do that, right? And so what I did was the opposite. I prioritized bigger revenue numbers and faster growth over profitability. Right? Over profitability, over cash flow, and financial stability. I lived larger than necessary. I convinced myself that having a big lifestyle was good for promoting the business. And this is the real two killers here. I put all the profit back into the business, reinvested it, but not on improving the things that actually made us money, right? And so we barely had any reserves because I was always putting the profit into developing a software, developing physical products, developing random things. And so we were always running on empty, right? And the real kicker is that I had no recurring revenue. It was a one-time purchase for the most part, and we had no repeat revenue. And so we were forced to generate new sales every month to survive. And this right here was creating an invisible trap that I just couldn't see. Because what happened was I created an offer that was easy to sell. Okay. And so the revenue continued to climb, but that growth was actually hiding the fact that my revenue model here was a ticking time bomb. And little did I know it was going to explode very, very soon. Now, the crazy thing is we might have survived it if it wasn't for my trip to Italy. And so it was so funny because that trip to Italy, at the very beginning, I started off by myself. And then halfway through, I flew some team members down so we could do content. Now, I remember the day that they arrived. They arrived early morning and I had slept in. And so I woke up, and when I woke up, their Uber was already at the place and they were like getting ready to come upstairs. And I was like, oh shit. I woke up scrambling, like shit. I started grabbing shit. And there were shopping bags, Louis Vuitton, Ferragamo, Gucci, some fucking French designer that I can't even pronounce. And I started shoving all of them into my luggage, right? And I was hiding them because I didn't want my team to see. I know it sounds stupid, right? So fucking stupid. But I was embarrassed. I was afraid of them seeing the stuff that I had bought. And so they walk in, I'm trying to act cool. I'm greeting them, yo, how's your flight? Welcome, buongiorno, welcome to Italy, right? They're putting their luggage away and I'm kind of like side-eyeing them like, okay, hopefully I didn't miss anything. Hopefully they don't see anything. And they didn't see shit, luckily. And I was relieved because in the company, I was still presenting myself as the monk, right? They all knew the story of how I shaved my head and I rebuilt the business like fucking Tony Stark in a cave with a box of scraps. But by that time, the monk who built the business felt like a stranger to me, right? The day before they arrived, I spent like $7,000 on sunglasses and cologne because $7,000 was only one course sale, right? And I was just like so far from that dude. I was no longer the guy that was checking his account to buy a $50 shaver from Walmart. In fact, in my head and in my journal at the time, I actually wrote about mentally killing the monk. And it was that exact thought process that led to the eventual downfall of everything else. But I'll get to that at the end. Okay, so right now, we're gonna look at who I was in that moment in Italy, right? And who that was someone who felt invincible, okay? And the emotion that drove that was pride. Right? I felt like money was infinite. I felt like I was too good to lose. I felt like I was fucking Homelander. Or one of my content team members that was on that trip, whenever she would talk about money or she would ask about money, I would always tell her, money's not real. It comes out of the sky. All you gotta do is reach out your hand and grab it. I literally used to say that. And so the first pattern that this created is that I would tinker with shit and I would break shit that were working just because I was bored. And so here's what that looks like. I changed things that were already working, right? Instead of identifying and optimizing the actual constraints of the business. This is a big one, I focus on changing things in areas that I was good at because I enjoyed those areas instead of actually doing the hard things that needed to get done, that the business needed. Okay, I ran large expensive tests instead of making smaller controlled tests. I literally was risking hundreds of thousands of dollars at a time. I would test new things when we are already halfway through like an ad spend campaign, right? And then I made major decisions based on hunches instead of data. I really didn't collect much data. It was all based off like, I feel like this is gonna work. I think this is gonna work. So we just ran with it. The second pattern was that I was chasing new things that were more exciting than the things that were already working, right? Shiny objects. So I threw caution to the wind. I was invincible. So there was no risk, right? I went into verticals I didn't understand, right? Shiny object. I went into software and other things instead of fine tuning the thing that actually worked. And I really just stopped focusing on my main thing, live events and ads, the things that were driving the business. I was just so scattered all over the place. And nothing highlights this like state of invincibility more than where we were right here in August. Okay, so this peak right here is August. You can see we had a really good month, $496,000. And this is actually the time I was in Italy, right? My birthday's in August, it was my birthday trip. And in Italy, I had inspiration. I was like, you know what? I have an idea, bright idea. For the first time ever, we are going to change our entire offer. And I remember announcing it to the team, like, guys, we're changing the offer. We just had our biggest month of the entire year. And one of the leaders on the team, he was like, perfect time to change everything. And he laughed. He kind of said it tongue in cheek, but when he said it, it landed on me, right? I'm like, fuck, maybe you're right. Maybe we shouldn't change everything right now after we just had our biggest month. And then I sat there and I thought about it and I was like, you know what? Fuck it, we're invincible. Nothing can hurt us. If only I knew that kryptonite was literally around the corner. And all the previous mistakes that I just talked about were about to pile up and mount an all-out attack on me in a very short period of time. So let me show you what happened here. So August, we did $496,000 and that was on $117,000 in ad spend. Okay. And so I'm in Italy. I had this big boost of inspiration. I'm like, let's change the entire offer and let's up the ad spend because this is an amazing offer. It's gonna do so well. So let's spend more money. Right? And so this is what we spend. We spent $185,000 this time. And then we go to September and we drop like a rock to $311,000. So we spent $70,000 more and made $185,000 less. I had shot the golden goose in the head and I was surprised when it didn't produce a fucking egg. So obviously we go into October, I'm gonna put the golden goose back in, right? I'm gonna put it back the old offer, the offer that was making money this whole entire time. And I fully expected that we would do another 500K like we did in August, right? But something then happened that I didn't anticipate. So it's the live event now, okay? It's on the challenge and I'm teaching them on day 3 about importing from Alibaba. I'm teaching an Amazon business and it's all about, okay guys, you go to Alibaba, you do this, we import from China. And as I'm doing this presentation, right, I can see the chat in the corner of my eye. So I have the chat here, I'm looking at the camera, chat's here, and the chat's exploding. I'm like, okay, what the fuck's, I'm looking at the corner of my eye, I'm like, okay, what's going on there? What the fuck's going on? What's going on? It's kind of concerning because usually the chat doesn't go like that unless there's a technical error. But in the corner of my eye, I can see one word continue to pop up. And I'm looking, I'm like, tariffs. That's interesting. I'm like, okay guys, don't worry. I'll cover questions at the end. Hold your questions till the end. And so it's October 2024 and the elections are next month. And all people are hearing in the news is Trump's tariffs. Tariffs. And so I had spent $135,000 in ads and you can see here, it's a fucking bloodbath, 191K. Sounds like it's profitable, but after covering ad costs, expenses, what that really meant was that I had lost about $120,000 that month. And now, remember, there's no reserves. I'm spending all the money on dumb shit and there's no recurring revenue. And so now it's November. Now I told this whole story in my last video, but one detail left out was that Trump had already won, okay? Trump had already won. And so the leaders of my team, we all got together and we discussed what we're gonna do. We're like, okay, how how are we going to handle the tariff problem? Like, were we gonna change the offer? We're gonna change the price point? Are we going to pivot the business, right? Were we gonna lay low for a while? And so we're having this discussion and they're looking at me to come up with an answer as leader, right? And so in my head, I knew that the right thing to do would be to just stop. Right? Stop running the offer, because the tariff problem, it was a problem before we knew that Trump was going to be elected. And now that he was already elected, now it was going to be like 10 times worse. And I knew that that was going to be the smart move, right? To pause. But when the whole team was looking at me for the answer, my response was mental error number 3, avoidance. And I was like, let me think about it. I just avoided the issue. We kept going, business as usual, and we ran headstrong into the next challenge as if there was no problem at all. Now looking back, obviously that was retarded, but I wanted to avoid the feeling of discomfort that would have come with the truth. The truth, which was that because of the way that I bloated the business in my state of denial, I couldn't survive even a month and a half without new revenue. And our live events were the only way to bring in new revenue. And since I thought the live event was invincible and bulletproof, I created no other revenue stream. And now the new conditions of the world destroyed that invincibility, right? It made it impossible for the event to actually succeed. And so the business was effectively dead. And the only way to truly save any remnant of it was to fire everybody, right? To move out of the house, but that would be admitting defeat. And so I avoided the reality in front of me and I led the team into a charge, into a losing battle. And so we spent $200,000 in credit and we made $70,000 on that event. All because I was afraid and driven by the emotion of fear, right? I did not want to make the hard call. And this is not something that just happened at the end, right? Avoidance has plagued the business since the beginning. And honestly, this is probably one of, if not the biggest, like the number one weakness as an entrepreneur. And my friends and my girl will probably tell you as a human being as well, right? Avoidance, it's the number one thing that I need to work on. Okay. And so how this manifested in the business, and is manifested in a lot of ways. There's times when I recognized mismatches within the team. I waited too long to let people go, right? I created departments and then I just didn't check on them at all for the performance. The biggest thing is that I thought I could hire leaders and then I didn't need to lead them because they were leaders, right? And when numbers momentum began turning against us, I waited too long to act. The next pattern was taking my finger off the pulse. I didn't measure enough. I didn't have data and I didn't like checking data in case the numbers hurt my feelings. I know it sounds ridiculous. I didn't monitor the money closely enough. Now there's obviously a lot of stuff to go through. Again, if you wanna go through this piece by piece, I will leave in the description. Also, I sorted it by category of like business category, the same mistakes, but instead of mental error category. And I also got team feedback from basically my left hand and my right hand in this business to kind of get their perspective, because obviously, self-analysis is going to be flawed because you don't have the perspective, the viewpoint of other people around you. So I brought that in here as well. Now, obviously I put this whole board together really just for myself, but I wanted to just put everything in here for you in case you could draw some insights from it for yourself as well. So I'll finish off the story and then I'll tell you what my big takeaways from all of this. Okay. So we failed that November event. Then Christmas, I had to sit everyone down. I had to let them go. It was the most stressful time, honestly, of my life. And then I did something that kind of sealed the deal for me, because even though we had already lost, I was still avoiding it, okay? Because now I had these big debts to pay and I thought, you know what? If we just have one more good challenge, one more good event, I could pay the whole thing off in one shot. And so December, with 4 team members, we ran another event. January, we pivoted the offer, we ran another event, and all of it was funded by my Amazon business. It was the one thing I had left. I could have easily just shut down the courses and walked away with just the Amazon business, And the funny thing is that year, ironically, when the course business was faltering in October, right? I had the biggest month for that Amazon business that year. I did $70,000 in that month. And this was a completely separate business. It did $280,000 that year, which is $70,000 of profit. But I took all that profit and I dumped it into running more ads for the course business. And by the time the course business was bankrupt, I owed a lot of money to a lot of places, and all that money from the Amazon business, which was supposed to be reinvested into more inventory to keep the Amazon business running, was gone. I had drained the healthy business to fund the dying one because I couldn't accept reality. And so what do we make of all this, right? What do I make of all of it? Well, when I zoomed out, right? If we look at the chart again, when I zoom out, it's all right here, right? We have the mental errors, and then we have all these mistakes. The mistakes that took me from making $400,000, $500,000 a month to zero. And it became very clear when I looked at this, and it's right at the top. Okay, we have shame. All these mistakes down here were made because I was feeling the emotion of shame. Pride. All these mistakes down here were made because I was feeling the emotion of pride. Fear. All these mistakes because I was feeling the emotion of fear. Every mistake that I made that destroyed the business came from making an emotional decision, which is funny because the monk who built the business was someone who prided himself in being detached from emotion, right? He was the kind of guy that would check his bank account before buying a $50 shaver from Walmart. Now, I don't think the solution is just to become the monk again. I actually think that that mindset was part of the problem because I made the monk my identity, and I made the identity binary, right? I was either the monk or I wasn't. Even just calling him the monk, right? There's no flexibility there. I bundled everything together, right? I bundled the discipline, the waking up early in the morning, eating proper stuff, going to the gym. I bundled all of that with being able to wear a different shirt, wanting to grow my hair. And it was this mode of extreme deprivation, right? And so if I ever wanted to break a little, because they were all bundled together, I actually had to break the whole thing, right? It's like when you're on a diet and you have a piece of chocolate and you're like, fuck it, I might as well just have pizza and have cake and I might as well have everything else as well, right? So what I actually think happened was because I was so attached to this monk, right? I didn't see it as something that I could do for a bit and then stop doing for a bit. I saw it as an all-in-one deal. And so in order to just grow my hair, I had to kill the entire monk. And so I think that attaching myself to a rigid identity, actually, it worked in the short term, but in the long term, it made me vulnerable to emotional decision-making. That's what made me vulnerable to emotional decisions. But what is it that the emotions were actually doing? Well, if we look at shame, right? That was me not wanting to be a guru. And so it made me build a wall so that reality couldn't come in. Even if it was Alex Hormozi knocking on the door, right? Pride put my head so high in the clouds that I couldn't see the reality below. And so both of these are me trying to live outside of reality because I didn't like the way reality made me feel. And then avoidance was when I could finally see reality, but I was too afraid to face it. And so what I found is that at the end of this roadmap, right, after taking the biggest L of my life, what I learned or what I'm trying to do going forward is to accept reality for what it is. Don't recoil from uncomfortable truths and then just have the courage to face it. And that's part of why I'm back on YouTube, right? It's a practice of me accepting reality, not being afraid to share it, and then just living with the truth of all of it. And so if you want to see what I'm doing next in my new reality and how I plan to face it, then I'll break that down in this video right here. It might not be uploaded yet, but when it is uploaded, you can click here, it should pop up, and I'll see you there.